Thank you very much, and welcome to this very interesting panel. We have an excellent set of panelists today from many different walks of the blockchain universe. Let's start with William Herkelrath, who leads sales and business development at Alphapoint, to quickly share his views on this very interesting topic and tell us a little bit more about himself as well.
Thank you. Is this on? Yeah. We are Alphapoint. We've been in the space longer than most people have, since 2013. And as I walk around the room, I've met a lot of people who say that they've met us at conferences in the past. And we've essentially focusing on digital assets, asset digitization, all the way through to cryptocurrency exchanges and other digital exchanges. And in particular, with respect to security, we're here to talk a little bit about our new patent on a regulated asset-backed token, which will effectively secure digital assets from theft in the future. We're not the only ones with such a technology, but it's these types of things that I think are going to change how people think about the blockchain.
Excellent. Thank you, William. Next up, we have Krishna Sriram, who is head of global partnerships at Quantstamp. They're also a YC company from the latest batch, so very interesting stories to share, I'm sure. Krishna, please tell us more about yourself.
So I have a previous background in product management, and I joined Quantstamp as the first employee last year after working with building Bitcoin and Ethereum communities since 2014 and 15. So Quantstamp, we do security for smart contracts, and we were the first tokenized company in Y Combinator. We are building an automated protocol for securing smart contracts at scale because the growth of smart contracts is exponential, but the solutions to secure them are linear.
Excellent. Thank you, Krishna. To my right, we have Henry Lee, who's the head of global business at the Icon Foundation. And Icon, of course, is very well known in the blockchain ecosystem. Henry, do tell us a little bit more about the work you do at Icon.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Henry. So I work at a project called Icon, which aims to build a smart contract platform with interoperability in mind from the designing stage. So I think the topic of today's panel is a very interesting topic. And we started as an enterprise providing private blockchain solutions to private institutions and corporations in Korea. And coming from that background, I think we were able to have a very unique perspective because we have been exposed to both private and now working on a public blockchain projects. So I think should I go now? Okay. So I think the concept of decentralization, if you think about it, has a lot of values: immutability, fault tolerance, securities, and efficiency in some areas. But decentralization, I think the most unique aspect about decentralization is that decentralization or the blockchain technology itself allows you to build a public deterministic system where no single party or no single individual have a control over how that network is run. And I think that I won't go too far right now for this time, but I think that could be a very interesting basis for our discussion at today's panel.
Thank you, Henry. Up next, we have Hartej Sawhney, who is co-founder of Hosho. Please tell us more about your work, Hartej.
Hi, my name is Hartej Sawhney. I'm the co-founder of Hosho.io. We are a cybersecurity firm that focuses on the blockchain space. We mainly audit smart contracts. We conduct penetration testing. We've built our own multi-signature wallet. We have a team of about 45 people based in Las Vegas and New York City. And we've conducted audits on over 100 projects to date. And we do not have an ICO of our own. And we stay very laser focused on being very objective in our approach in auditing smart contracts and conducting penetration testing of websites and exchanges. And we're growing our presence step by step globally. We're essentially the leading cybersecurity provider in the space. And in regards to this topic, I think it starts by talking about how do you define decentralization, because I would personally say that 100% decentralization is essentially anarchy, and it would require each and every single human being to be running nodes, to be mining, to be putting in commits, etc. And so that's kind of where I would start with my perspective of how do you define decentralization and, you know, what is 100% decentralization?
Excellent. Thank you, Hartej, and certainly food for thought. And last up, we have Ria Achalkar, who is the CEO of VeriDoc Global India. Ria, do tell us more about the work you're doing at VeriDoc Global India.
Sure. First of all, thank you for being invited on this platform. I think this is a great opportunity. I think it's also great to see what else is happening in this extremely innovative, new and emerging space. Mine is a company, VeriDoc Global India, that is attempting to help exactly in this effort to decentralize and to ensure or to try and get in some means of transparency in the system, whether it is documentation data that percolates to a digital format or to physical format. So what VeriDoc does is it's an anti-fraud data verification system that ensures the users are looking at true and original authentic data as it was stored at the point of creation. This is a patented technology. The headquarters are in Singapore, and we are here for getting Indian companies on board with this technology. The innovativeness of the patent is where we are using a simple QR code to access the data that is authenticated and stored on the blockchain. The use cases for this are countless, from documents, right? So yes, the world is moving towards digitization, but when the world is going there with modern technology, unfortunately, there are also manipulations happening where documents are frauded. Counterfeiting happens to a large extent, and so the system can stop it in its tracks at the grassroots level at the point of creation. So the technology simply uses a QR code to scan the data and points to an address that's stored on the blockchain, and the concerned documents are pulled up by the issuing authority. So our customers are issuing agencies, governments, companies, corporates. Use cases vary from pharmaceutical, supply chain, education industry, and so on. And I think to your question, while it cannot be 100%, all of these efforts, I think what everybody is doing here is try and get the system a little bit closer to reducing costs, reducing overheads, administrative efforts, and at the same time gaining transparency and control and generating confidence, because the world is so digital, so many transactions happening across the globe. There is that gap that needs to be filled in, that the data that doesn't happen exchange in person can be trusted and believed in.
Thank you, Ria. So I'll start with some questions and contextualize the questions to every panelist on stage so they can share a little bit more of the learnings that they're coming across as they build their own organizations, their partnerships, their sales teams, and so on. So let's start with William. William, you probably speak to a lot of very large potential clients. And of course, they have questions about security first. So could you talk to us a little bit about what some of the potential clients, what some of the ecosystems asking from the blockchain universe in terms of security? How far evolved are their requirements?
Great, yeah. So our specialty is finance. I don't know nearly as much about any of the other applications, and I know a lot of discussions today have been about healthcare and government and all kinds of wonderful things, but specifically in finance, security is obviously the #1 concern. It's also one of the most highly regulated fields. And with high-profile thefts and things of that nature, wallet security and security, assuring that those assets don't end up in the wrong hands is the #1 concern. So what a lot of people are doing, of course what Alphapoint is doing as well, as I mentioned earlier, are focusing on precisely how we can control tokens from ever ending up outside of a specific group or a whitelisted group of individuals, a whitelisted group of wallets that are allowed to basically ever receive a token. So if you are digitizing an asset and you are going to create 1,000 versions of a painting, of a beautiful Monet painting, and you're going to have 1,000 shareholders, you can, after your KYC and AML processes, you can connect directly to your CRM system. You can ensure that everyone that is on your whitelist are the only people who can ever take that into their wallet. And if I have that in my wallet and I'm whitelisted and I go to a card game at night and I've had a little too much to drink, and I make a bet, and I decide to use my phone to try to transfer my token to somebody else, the system will understand that new person has not been KYC, they've not been AML, they're not on the whitelist, they cannot receive a token, the transaction will fail, and by doing so, if someone were also to try to steal the token or hack in or do whatever else, the transaction would fail. So within small ecosystems, it can absolutely work. You can even grow that CRM system to thousands of users. It's not the type of thing that would work for millions of users per se, because at some point that whitelist is going to get a little large. But it's these type of technologies that will eventually get better and better and better to ensure the tokens and the value of those assets don't end up in the hands of people they should not be.
Excellent. That's a very good point. Thank you, William. Krishna, now you have a very interesting perspective from a startup trying to build and go global. And you head global partnerships at Quantstamp. Talk to us about what some of your potential partners or current partners expect from a small company trying to build something so audacious, so big. Are there some unrealized expectations? Are there some things you can do in a more advantageous way using blockchain? Talk to us about some of the things you're learning as head of global partnerships.
Yeah, so just for the purpose of the topic, I would like to take a step back and, primarily our engagement with enterprises, we try to educate them and build awareness about what this technology can do and what it can't. So, we try to tell them, so they're usually in this like proof of concepts phase where they're trying to learn more about blockchain technology and what it can do and how it can benefit their enterprise. And, or it could be a regulator as well. And typically what we tell them is, at the end of the day, the blockchain technology is just slow, expensive, and fairly dumb database. They're not very smart. Like, smart contracts are not very smart. They're just proving the correctness of transactions at scale. And what they're really good at is financial coordination and lowering transaction costs for all participants involved. And they verify the correctness of transactions in a decentralized way and very securely. So for the purpose of this, let's take the example of Bitcoin as a decentralized application. Bitcoin is a protocol, and at the endpoints, you can build centralized applications that have your typical banking requirements like KYC and so on. And you can build an exchange, and you can build wallets and all sorts of things and financial instruments. But at the end of the day, Bitcoin itself can never be manipulated or can't be the correctness of the transactions can never change because no one can hack the network without taking control of the hash power, and that costs a lot of money. So at the end of the day, you can still have a mixture of centralized and decentralized applications, as with the case of Bitcoin, where you can build a centralized service on top of the decentralized protocol that can never be changed, like Bitcoin or Ethereum. So we try to tell enterprises about the use cases that arise from this, such as microfinance or things that are natively enabled by blockchains, or even say remittance, right? Because if you take Western Union, that can entirely be replaced by smart contracts and blockchains, because they charge 9% transaction fees, and that's a big hit for anyone in an emerging market. And usually the poorer the country, the more they charge in terms of transaction fees. So things like this, enterprises can really help by building proof of concepts that use the unique advantages that blockchain provides and the interactions that are enabled, rather than thinking in Web 2 paradigms of building software. What we're building here is a global monetary system that allows financial inclusion for billions of people.
Excellent. Thank you, Krishna. So Henry, Icon is obviously very well known, and you've achieved a lot of partnerships very quickly. And I'm sure security and decentralization have different requirements from many of the partnerships you're building, especially in East Asia. So what is your view on security, decentralization, and getting everyone to agree to a common way of looking at these things?
Sure. I think that's a very good question. So before I kind of answer that, I think it's important to kind of think about, why we, maintain, a centralized way of doing business up to this point. Centralization itself is not a bad thing. It was meant to be a system where you could actually scale the coordination. When you need to coordinate with people on a large scale, centralization or having a more hierarchical structure is a better and more effective ways of doing that, doing coordination, doing transaction on a scale. But then for some reasons, a lot of reasons that I'm not going to discuss on this panel, we've started to see flaws in how centralization fails in modern day society, especially with the evolution of the internet and the age that we're living in right now. So it is very important to have that narrative, have that idea as part of the narrative when we talk about decentralization. So having said that, at ICON, as I mentioned, we work with both private blockchains and public blockchains. And working with enterprises, we came to realize that these companies and corporations have actually very specific requirements and technical specifications that need to be met, and they need to follow existing compliances and legacy infrastructures. And it's really hard to be compliant with all those requirements, and yet at the same time, have a decentralized structure and very innovative itself. So I think what we're trying to do at ICON is having a little bit different approach to decentralization. So we have a lot of enterprise partnerships. We have partnership with 25 securities firms in Korea, and also companies like Line, which is like a social messenger application service with 200 million monthly users. So what we're trying to do with these corporations and enterprises is that we allow them to build a private blockchain where they have more control, but still allow them to be connected to a public blockchain where they could actually enforce some of those smart contracts that are being run on those private blockchains. So if you just look at a consortium of blockchain with, let's say, 10, 15 institutions on that consortiums, and if that's not, and if the contract on those private blockchains are not enforceable, what happens if a dispute comes up? What happens if a single corporation or number of corporations within that consortium blockchain doesn't agree with certain governance or certain transaction that is happening on that blockchain? Well, you can't solve it on chain. You have to find some off chain legal procedures to resolve that dispute. So what I wanted to say for the corporation and enterprise looking to adapt blockchain technology is the most innovative part of blockchain technology is the fact that you could create, as I mentioned, a public deterministic system where you don't have the control of the system or the network. So when you're trying to implement some sort of a blockchain technology to your enterprise or your business processes, please think of a way where you can connect to a public network, where you can verify your transactions, and where your transactions are enforceable by nature. That gives you so much more legitimacy and so much more trust to your customers using your service on a private network, because that the customers know that the contracts that are happening on the private blockchain will be enforceable and will act in a way that is designed for. So I think that's a lesson learned from so far working at ICON and working at The Loop, the enterprise company, and that's how we kind of see the concept of decentralization and how this concept could get closer to real life mass adoptions.
Excellent. Thank you, Henry. That's great perspective. Now, Hartej, you made a very interesting point on first principles, that if we really want true decentralization, every individual on this planet should run a node, they should run their own commits, they should be fully self-aware of the responsibility they have for the network, right? And that may be an ideal we never reach. So talk to us about what you think a realistic, stable state will look like if we're trying to achieve decentralization, but we're making sure it's secure at the same time. What are your views on the principles of this question?
Yeah, so my thoughts on the matter are, if we were to take a coin and have it forked, and we were to say that 60% has full control, but 40% of the people are scrambling, is it still fully decentralized? Do we have 100% decentralization? And the thing is, similar to, his perspective, what we just talked about, there's nothing wrong with some percentage of centralization. And when it comes to the security perspective, we see that 100% decentralization, as I said before, is essentially pure anarchy. And from the Hosho perspective on cybersecurity, more and more as we're auditing entire protocols, we're seeing certain centralized functionality baked into the private blockchain. And there's nothing wrong with that if it's coded the right way, especially when it comes to, let's say, healthcare. Healthcare is a really good example of a blockchain that needs to remain private. And these are the types of scenarios where I'm not in favor of 100% decentralization. There needs to be a centralized authority. And from the security perspective, one other thing I will just chime in on is every protocol, every smart contract needs to go through a thorough third-party audit. And it's very important that once the code is written, that a smart contract written on a decentralized ledger is audited, and that the entire protocol itself has gone through an audit process. And a lot of new blockchains make claims such as, well, we can do 2,000 transactions per second. And this can be tested through a professional audit. And it's something that we've been doing with auditing entire protocols. We've been doing DDoS attacks. We've been doing fuzz testing. These are the types of things that need to become industry standard, that may or may not enter the regulatory framework of governments. But we're hoping that through self-governance in the industry, we can come together, at least among cybersecurity professionals such as Quantstamp and other major cybersecurity players, and we can come together and say, let's come to an agreement about self-governance. What are you doing when it comes to conducting an audit of a smart contract? What are you doing when it comes to auditing entire protocols? What kind of tools and testing are you utilizing, whether some automated or some manual? Because the reality is, nothing's going to be 100% automated just yet. It's not a reality of where we are in technology today. So those are my thoughts on the topic.
Excellent. Thank you, Hartej.
I'd like to add something to what Hartej said. The important thing here is that code has never been able to be a custodian of money before. And for the first time, we have programmable money with zero counterparty risk. And that's why it's really important to secure blockchains. And if we think about smart contract auditing, one of the reasons why it's so important is because smart contract auditing or smart contract auditors are the risk underwriters for blockchains and smart contracts. So when a regulator wants to understand the risks or set standards, they should definitely be working with setting high security standards, because the fact that now code can hold money, and that these contracts and blockchains are probably going to be transacting trillions of dollars of value in their lifetime.
Yeah, and the thing is that the quality of engineers out in the world that are actually writing protocols or actually writing smart contracts today is relatively low. Right? So most things today have been done on Ethereum and Solidity, and they're mostly smart contracts being written by ex-web developers, not people who have a cybersecurity mindset, not people who have a QA mindset. And traditional software engineers, they usually rely on third-party auditors anyway. And so in this world, behind a smart contract is actual money. So there's significant incentive to hack into a smart contract. There's significant incentive to hack into a protocol. Whereas if I was coding an application like Angry Birds, I'd finish the coding of the application, ship it off to the App Store, and just release version 1.1.4, then version 1.1.5, and keep trying to debug and de-risk and debug and de-risk. But in this case, most smart contracts are written to be relatively irreversible. And there's incredible incentive for hackers to go after the money that is there. And I think it's extremely important in our industry in general to start talking about best practices, education for more engineers, and not just looking over things like a $500 million hack here and a $100 million hack there like it's nothing. This industry is not going to mature if we don't value security and talk about security more regularly.
Understood. Thank you. And I don't have too much time left, so it's our last question to the panelists before we open up. But Ria, you mentioned some real-world examples with pharmaceuticals and so on. Could you talk to us a little bit more about the real-world use cases and problems you're seeing as you work with clients through your company?
Sure. I think I did mention pharmaceutical, but I think based on everybody's input here, I'm going to take another example. We recently built a little demo for Tata Steel, where they are, one of the aspects that they're looking to do is switch from lump sum turnkey to open book costing. And basically what that means is that the prices of all contractors and subcontractors, vendors and sub-vendors are made transparent up the hierarchy. And so if you can imagine a large company, not Tata Steel, let's say any company, getting a huge contract of, let's say, the infrastructure, roadway construction, they get the contract and then it's handed off to one or two main key players, and then going down from there is a three-dimensional spider's web, where there are multiple vendors, suppliers, deliveries, labor, service, everything included. And at any given point of time, if any of the stakeholders want to get a pulse on where is this project at, what are the risks right now, am I at the risk of going over budget or over timeline? And if all the data is accessible, is stored and accessible in a decentralized fashion, it's easier, it's transparent for people to see anything that will impact their schedule. For example, if a supply of 50,000 bags of cement does not arrive, there is no need for the labor to get there on that particular date. So they can either, knowing with smart contract, if the delivery was supposed to set out on a certain date and it hasn't, an automatic alert will be sent. The supervising officer can make either secondary arrangements, or they can even push forth the labor and to wait for this particular delivery. So they are in more tighter control of the whole schedule of the whole project. And at any given point of time, there's less of administrative overhead of picking up the phone and calling someone, what happened to this and what happened to that. There's less of excuses, there's less paperwork, and like I said, the stakeholders have a pulse on the project at any given point of time. They can dive in to the exact risks, and they can still stay and have that larger overview that they need to have. And this will be very hard to do on a centralized thing, because everybody will have their specific softwares, their specific technologies. They will have their own methods, invoicing systems, payments, approvals have to be made, requests for payments have to be made. But the moment it is decentralized, there are smart contracts in place, all of these individual companies, the trustless system, it's easy for people to see and view information only pertinent to them and conduct transactions accordingly. So a delivery person can scan the same QR on a particular contract, the data is on the blockchain, and then they can certify that they have made that shipment. And then somebody from the receiving side can scan that QR and approve that, yes, the shipment has come in, it's within the quantity and the quality as expected, and the smart contract automatically executes it. That is, I think, a great use case for decentralized. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Ria. So with that, we're out of time. We have obviously had a very diverse set of panelists, and we had to do a survey of their opinions while we zoom through these questions. Please feel free to reach out and meet these panelists off stage if you have any questions. We're out of time. Thank you so much, William, Krishna, Henry, Hartej, and Ria. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very
everyone.
much.